Fuck 'em up. You kidding me? I gotta organize them
There you go. So welcome everyone. Three Guys, Many Games, playoff edition after week 1 of NCAA playoffs. I'm your host, Steve Sombrato. I'm here with my big brother, Vincent Sombrato, and Rob Smalley, Levittown's own. And today we got a very special guest for you. Very, very familiar voice for anyone who follows the major games and the biggest moments in college lacrosse. He's a Notre Dame grad. He's on the board of directors of CityLax. He's a staple on every mic from the east to the west. And we're looking forward to having a great discussion with him on a number of topics. The great, the one, the only Eamon McAnaney. Let's get a little cheer.
It's great to be on. If I had known that was going to be the entrance, I would have broke out the green CityLax t-shirt, but that was awesome.
Exactly. Well, we're really excited. There's a lot of pressure for us. We're dealing with professionals now. This is our little Wayne's World experiment that we have, and people seem to like it. We're getting great feedback from a lot of people, but it's people like yourself and many of the other great guests we've had on that is really something that has made this catch on a bit.
It's been a lot of fun to listen to and watch. You guys are doing a great job, and like I said, I'm pumped that you invited me on. Thanks a lot.
Well, I think one of the things we always like to know is, and Vinny likes to get started with this because he likes to do a deep dive into the beginnings. He likes to go way back. Vin, you wanna take your role?
Yeah, I actually, well, let's start with this, Eamon. Obviously we followed you through the years, listening to your broadcasts. You're one of the originators. You with Quint and Cork and the whole crew, and we followed that. And I did know that you were a defenseman from Notre Dame, but I never know where you grew up and when you actually started playing. So maybe you could tell us a little about that.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why CityLax is so passionate for me is because I grew up in Manhattan, New York City, and obviously there was no lacrosse in New York City. So I actually went to prep school called the Hill School in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, and that's where I picked it up. I was a baseball player growing up, like so many, and first of all, I really wasn't that good, and baseball full-time, 4 or 5 days a week practicing was really boring, and I saw everyone else playing lacrosse, so sophomore year, I picked it up. Played basketball growing up, football, so everyone knows the combination, so just took to it right away, fell in love with it, so got on the wall during the summers and, became pretty good, I guess good enough, to play as varsity there, and then walk on at Notre Dame. Notre Dame was a lot different back then when I arrived in 1987, 1988. We kind of all walked on. I was D1 and we had a chance to play for the NCAA tournament, but it certainly wasn't what it is now. But I played for Rich O'Leary for a couple of years, and then Coach Corrigan took over, and obviously that was the beginning of making lacrosse, Notre Dame taking it more seriously. It took a while. I'm sure we'll get into that, but I didn't touch a lacrosse stick until high school at the prep school at the Hill School. I had a blast playing for Harry Price, and it was something I'm very fortunate able to continue and play at Notre Dame. Made the best friends for life, and being an athlete at Notre Dame, no matter where we were in the pecking order, obviously the football team was winning Heisman's and national championships at that era, but it was a blast, and it changed my life, and that's why I'm so committed to the sport and growing it.
Well, first of all, let me take one step back to say you have one of the most famous names in lacrosse history. So you had a lot of pressure on. I mean, can you imagine Notre Dame, a guy saying, we got Eamon McAnaney coming in?
I got a great story about that at tryouts. Mm-hmm. Notre Dame, this was a different world, okay? No one knew about anyone in 8th grade, let alone, coming out of high school. So I go for the tryouts. I sign up for tryouts. First day of tryouts, the assistant coach, Dave Cerny, reads off the names. And he didn't mention my name. And I said, Coach, I knew it was going to be tough to make, but I figured I'd at least make it through line drills. And he goes, what's your name? I said, Eamon McAnaney. He goes, oh, when I saw that name on the list, I thought someone was pulling my leg. He grew up in, central New York or upstate New York and knew about the Eamon McAnaney, who played at Cornell and was the legend, obviously. My mom likes to joke the only time she heard my name pronounced correctly at a road game was when we played Cornell my junior year in Ithaca.
No, that's great.
Hey, Eamon, is it Eamon McAnaney or Amen? How do you pronounce it?
It's somewhere in between. It's Eamon. So you don't have to say a prayer when you say hello to me, but it's Eamon. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, you had a lot to live up to in that name. Eamon was a friend, and you called him a legend. Definitely was a legend, a winner. He impacted so many people. We lost him on 9/11, with so many others in the lacrosse world and in general.
Absolutely.
And he left a phenomenal legacy that it impacts all lacrosse players, I think, but particularly that Cornell team. They all have that spirit of Eamon, and when they get down that field. So you know
There's no doubt about that. And he played, you mentioned the word legacy. We kind of throw that around all over the place, but that's what amazes me about Eamon, because obviously I never had a chance to see him play in person. But back then, they actually got some impressive coverage on Wide World of Sports, albeit tape delay, probably 2 weeks later. But the Times wrote about him. I actually had a chance to meet him because he also played football. So my dad took me up to a Cornell Columbia football game where I had a chance to meet him. But there were times when I was getting started in my career calling the high school games on MSG, and I'd be on a Long Island football game or high school game, and people would come up to me and start telling me that my dad was the greatest, he was the best. I loved watching my dad, and I'd say, "Hey, look, I'm a big fan of my dad too, but I'm sure we're talking about someone different." But the way he played, really, really resonated
That's
with
great.
people.
Hey, Vinny, can I bring up one little point? And I don't want to embarrass Vinny, but it's a nice note. Can you tell the story when you were going out for the world team? Am I on that Eamon came to you? You didn't know who he was. Can you tell that story? He don't like to make it about himself, but I know he doesn't want to tell it. But
I don't know the story you're talking about.
I forget. Go on. I'm sorry. I'm a little off. I'm par for the course.
I never tried out in the year that Eamon played. The last world team Eamon was on was 78. And I came on in 82. He didn't try out in 80. At that point, he was on with life. I think he probably had a couple of kids already, and he had his job, and that was it. He had his fill of lacrosse. Yeah, it was special to. The one thing maybe Bobby's referring to was, he told me one time what he thought about me as a player, and he was very gracious in the things he said, and it meant more to me than any kind of awards I had gotten. It meant more that a guy like him respected my game, and it made me feel really good. That's why I try to do the same for guys, whether it matters to them or not, coming from me. But I let guys know that I have great respect for their abilities and the hard work they put in to become the players that they are. So, but so now you walk on, you play at Notre Dame, and what did you study at Notre Dame that you ended up going into broadcasting? Do they have a school for that at Notre Dame?
They didn't then. They do now. They had an American Studies major, which is how you could take journalism classes. It was kind of a potpourri of liberal arts, and that's what I ended up majoring in. But that's how I was able to take a few journalism classes. They had, you had a radio station. It wasn't anything like now, obviously, for the young kids with all these streaming opportunities. But we had a radio station where I was able to call a couple of football games and do a talk show. But I didn't have enough broadcasting chops coming out of college to get a job, so I had to go behind the scenes. I started at ESPN up in Bristol, Connecticut as a production assistant, cutting highlights and doing everything that job entails. It wasn't until about 2000 where I took being on air seriously and was able to put together a tape and get some jobs. And it wasn't until around 2006 when College Sports Network and ESPNU were created, when lacrosse was being taken seriously as a TV sport, and they really needed people who knew the sport. So I got lucky. I got a chance. Originally, I started at MSG as the analyst of the high school game of the week because I was working with them as the sideline reporter. So they gave me a chance to be the analyst. Vinny, you'll appreciate this. Our first game ever was an amazing game between West Islip and Chaminade.
Wow.
West Islip absolutely loaded, as was Chaminade.
Right.
Justin Turry, now the head coach of St. John's, was on that team. Caulfield, Ryan Flanagan. So that was a great opportunity. So ESPNU gave me a chance to call games as the analyst. And boy, the college game moves so much faster than the high school game. My first game was Hofstra at Hopkins, and Seth Tierney's still mad that I missed a crease violation by Jake Byrne, I think it was, that Hopkins got away with. But luckily for me, they moved me over to the play-by-play, which was a little bit more my speed. I was able to get enough reps so that I guess maybe by 2011 I was kind of their main guy. Maybe a little bit earlier than that. 2012 I got to call a championship game, and yeah, that's kind of how I broke through.
So let me ask you, obviously, there were other guys along the way with you, and you sometimes did games as a team and the whole bit. But one of the original OGs from a broadcasting standpoint was Leaf. Bless you, Smalls. Was
Thank you.
Leaf Elsmo. Did you listen to games that he called, or how did you try to develop your style? How did you? Just came natural to you that you were able to?
It certainly didn't come natural, but yeah, I listened to Leaf. Obviously you don't want to steal anybody's stuff, but you got to pay attention to how he calls the sport because, like you said, he was the OG. The sport was really never on TV except for Final Four weekend and Leaf calling it. So there was like basketball. You grew up listening to Marv, Mike Breen, 9 million different guys. Lacrosse, there was really only one person you could listen to. So the cadence, what he thought was important, how you identify who's on the field and how often there's a trick between a radio play-by-play call and a TV play-by-play call. Do you keep rattling off every name on the pass? So certainly you learn a lot from Leaf. And then when you get into it, you have to have your own style because you're the one who's going to sink or swim on your abilities. So you certainly take a lot from, growing up in New York, listening to Marv call the Knicks, then Mike Breen, the baseball announcers that you would listen to, even studio work, even though it's completely different. Warner Wolf was a guy I admire. So you kind of take whatever you listened to growing up as a kid and turn it into yourself. But certainly Leaf gave us all the blueprint on how to call lacrosse.
What
I have to, Vin. I have to tell Eamon a story since you had mentioned Leaf. So we have to, and the fact that Vinny's got his Long Island, somehow we both ended up with the Long Island Lacrosse Club shirts. So this is a perfect time to tell this Leaf Elsmo story. I wonder if Eamon had ever heard this, maybe through possibly Quint. So in 1996, we were set to play Team Toyota in the championship game, the national championship, which was really the highest pre-MLL, so it's the highest level. And Toyota's loaded. They have the Gates. They have Mark Millen. They have the Wade brothers. Top to bottom, they had 30 guys that were unbelievable. This was a year we didn't have many guys Long Island. We might have had 15 players, but we had pretty good 15 players. And the semifinals, we barely beat Rochester. We won in overtime. And Toyota pummeled the guys from Boston in their semifinal. And the games were being broadcast, and Leafs, I think it was Leafs production company that was doing it. And before the last game, I'm sitting on the side, and Sal Cassio sitting there with me, and he comes up and he tells us, he says, "Hey guys, listen, this championship game is going to be on. Do you think you can keep it close for 3 quarters?" We start laughing. We had a little strategy. We slow the game down. Quint was the goalie for that game. He was playing for Toyota. We end up going on to win 13-6. By the first quarter, Quint was being mic'd. He ripped the mic off in the middle of the first quarter, launched it. We end up winning that game, and then we actually had T-shirts made with Leaf's greatest call, the "Just Keep It Close" game. That was what that game became.
I can tell you 2 things. That's the first and only time Quint got rid of the mic, and he definitely didn't tell me anything about that game since he lost.
Yeah, but what's interesting, because I have watched so many games on television, and I pay attention to you guys, and I think you all do a great job with it. But I think one of the hardest things for you guys, and I'm sure you keep in mind because I hear how you explain things, is that you're trying to grow an audience that's not familiar with lacrosse, right? So if you're talking over their heads because you're talking real lacrosse jargon and knowing the intricacies of the game, you're saying it a certain way. It means nothing to a lot of the people who are trying to pick it up, So I think you guys do a good job in explaining, why a team clears a certain way or how much time they have or what kind of offense they're running. And I've heard a lot of you like related to basketball with the pick and roll and the different things, about zone defenses that you would have in other sports. So I think that, you guys, it's more than just calling the game. I think you and others have brought it along the way that it's explained. You're not only just calling the game, you're explaining the game. And I think that's
Yeah,
a
and
big plus.
that's a fine line to walk because you also don't want to insult the lacrosse fan,
Right.
right? I mean,
Right.
no one's ever explained a double dribble or traveling while calling a basketball
Right.
game, and that's what our bosses kind of said. I remember one time, we would say, are they going to bump up a pole? The team's got two really good midfielders. You got a long stick. Or are you going to bump up a pole? And our bosses would be like, you have to explain what that means. I go, it literally means bump up a pole. You'll hear Quint, compare the 10-man ride to a full court press. So, you got to walk a fine line between explaining it and sort of talking down to the lacrosse audience because they always know that. And, I'm kind of a wise guy from New York. When our bosses tell me that, they say, you're going to have people watching this sport for the first time. They don't know the rules. I go, being a wise guy, I say, can you explain to me, can you show me a copy of where our hockey guys explain how when the puck goes all the way down to the other end,
Right.
they blow the whistle. But then one time when it goes all the way down to the other end, they don't. And they go, well, that's because there's no icing on a power play.
Right.
I go, my dad has no idea about that. Who's going to tell him that? So,
Right.
my bosses don't like that, but that is part of the job, no doubt.
Yeah. But like you said, that is a fine line. But I think you guys have, walked that line pretty good. And, because I do hear explanations from time to time.
And especially now, there's more and more rules. Like I still don't understand the goal mouth rule. So, but it is an interesting sport to broadcast, no doubt about that.
Back to the Syracuse guys. The goal mouth rule.
Hey, Eamon, can I jump in for just one quick question? One of the things I'm really interested in, and me and Vinny, we go at it every time, is the new call where it's discretionary, where it's the head injury.
Right.
The other game, that should have been a 2 to 3 minute, in my opinion, when someone is totally vulnerable in the game and you come and you plotted it, you knew you were going to do it, and you crunched the kid. What was the kid's name that got hit, Ben?
It's the Harvard-Syracuse game?
Syracuse game.
Syracuse game?
And they only gave him a 1 minute penalty. And the only reason why they gave him a 1 minute penalty, because it was the playoffs. They didn't want to tick off people. But that's a play where you could totally be injured for life. So it's like a rule. What is the rule?
Well, let me play devil's advocate, though, Rob. He's bent down on his own. No one put his head down, right? And that's a playoff ground ball. The Harvard guys just supposed
hold on
a second. Are the Harvard guys just supposed to sit there next to him and say, okay, go pick up the ground ball with 8 minutes left to go in a playoff game in the fourth quarter? I understand it was a penalty. It was a penalty. He came through with the cross check. That's the penalty. But the fact that and first of all, Mark Dixon on the call explained that in our sport, there's no defenseless. Football targeting has a defenseless part of the call. In lacrosse, as the way Mark Dixon, who knows the rules better than anyone, explained, there's no defenseless term in lacrosse. So the Syracuse player bends down to pick up the ground ball. 3 Harvard guys are just supposed to sit there and go, okay, sir, pick up the ground ball and have possession. Now, again, it was a penalty. He came through with the cross check. But is he not supposed to nudge him? I mean, they go 1 minute, non-releasable. According to what Mark Dixon said, he expected it to be 2, but it was still non-releasable.
Yeah.
It should be at least a 2 minute. He actually had time to look at the player and figure out what he was doing and then hit him.
Well,
and also
that's your perception of it. Other guys saying
You're also looking at it in slow motion. That game is not played in slow motion.
I mean, look, the refs are making calls. I mean, look, I understand based on what happened in that Duke game, when Penn State in the crease and, they went to instant replay, but instant replay could be good and bad. It's like it slows down the game.
The other thing is they're not getting the same views we are at home because there was another Penn State game this year. I think it was Maryland or Ohio State where the ball, at least to us at home watching on the couch, clearly was a goal, and they look at the replay and apparently they're not seeing what we're seeing, so they say there's not enough evidence. So it's still needed. They still need replay in all sports, and it still gets screwed up in all sports. But Rob, to your point, I think it's the toughest sport to call because for some reason they really want to eliminate contact. And we all played back in the day when contact was allowed. I'm not certainly putting myself at playing at a great level, but there was a physicality to the game that was attractive to some of us who wanted to play, right? Just like hockey and certainly football. And now they've eliminated that. And don't get me wrong, Rob, the play you're talking about was a penalty. At first, my thought looking at it live, I didn't think it was a penalty, but certainly on the replay, the hands are separated on the stick and he comes through with the stick. But you'll see a guy get lit up on a clear, and just because it's a huge hit, they automatically call anything. When back in 1988 or 1995, that was not a penalty. But we're just going to call it now because we want to eliminate the big hit from lacrosse. Now, the players have to be smart enough because you have to know that that's going to get called, but I still want to know why.
There was another one, and I don't know if you saw it in the it was in the Princeton game where it was an extra man where the guy in the crease was doing a turnaround shot, and a guy came and slid and hit him. And I don't even think he ever contacted his head at all. It's just that
I think that's Princeton Cornell Ivy League championship game you're talking about.
His head went back. His head went back. But it wasn't because of a blow. It was just because of the angle of his body was going. And they gave him 2 minutes.
Yeah, that was a good example. Yeah, everyone thought it was helmet to helmet, and it wasn't.
It wasn't helmet to helmet, right? Exactly. It was
exactly.
So I don't know.
Let me jump in on one quick thing, Eamon, and I understand the going back and forth here, but also you got to understand most of the things. It's all about safety with concussion. I believe that we don't have enough protocol in the game. Where's concussion? I see kids get hit. I'm looking at it as if I had somebody out there, my kid or anything. A kid gets cracked. We don't have anybody checking to see where concussions. You can't tell me that people are walking on the sideline with these helmets and they don't have concussions. When you get hit in the head like that, he had some damage to his head. He got hit there. So he came off the field and he's right back in. We don't even look at our players. So I don't respect the game as far as that. And I'm not picking on nobody.
You make a good point. I think that's a tough problem with sports at all levels.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to cover high school football, and I'd see kids go back in the game. I'd be like, I can't believe that kid's playing.
We don't even have a tent where somebody looks and goes, "Ooh."
Hey, Rob, the NFL has a tent, and they still send quarterbacks back out there after like 1 or 2 plays. I don't mean to joke about concussions, but I mean it's definitely a huge issue in sports.
Yeah. Well, I think some of the issue comes in. Look, as you said, when you were in college and even before me, the physicality. I don't remember ever, like as a midfielder, coming down the middle and taking a shot that I didn't get hit. I got hit every time I took a shot.
Right. Well, the argument I always have is who's making this player defenseless? If you want to get rid of the big hit, then get rid of the outlet pass. Say the goalie has to throw it parallel because you're giving the offense a free clear. You're saying, okay, this guy is allowed to catch the ball in stride over the shoulder in the middle of the field, and I can't light him up. So,
well, the physical, the clean hit, and all of that's fine. I think the one thing that's changed over the years that I've seen is, and I see it in play today, is defensively, because, I played in the era of a two-way midi, so you played offense and defense. And when you played midfield defense, it was all about being able to move your feet, staying up on guys, maybe engaging a guy and getting a little physical. What the game has kind of morphed into, to me, if you took that game and put it back in the 80s, there would be a lot more cross-checks and holes called because these guys, initial thing on defense now is they're cross-checking you. It's an immediate, that's what's taught, and it's effective. You try to be a dodger, and a guy gets in on you with those two hands on you with using that stick. Used to be, the rule was so many inches, your hands had to be apart and all of that. Now these cross-checks, and now they got a thing where I see guys play cross-handed sometimes, like a short stick guarding a guy. They'll just engage a guy. They call it a can opener. They got different names, what they call it. But, you're getting into a guy and lifting him, and sometimes they call a hole, but more times than not, they don't. So, look, it's not, like you said, it's not an easy game to call. It's very difficult, but I just don't like where you're at the highest level, in college I'm talking about, and calls like that impact the overall game. Harvard's got to be kicking themselves that a penalty, they look to be in good shape, and a penalty on a ground ball where three guys had the guy on the other team surrounded to pick up the ball, and a guy comes in. Now, from my point of view, was it necessary for that guy to do that? Not at all. I think the guy was trapped, and he didn't have to do it that way, but he did. And Of course, it cost them big time.
But everybody knows the rules now. Are the coaches telling them this? They keep getting these
No,
plays
it's not
done.
about. I think people know the rules, Smalls. It's just in the
He got caught up in the moment and he
heat of the
committed,
moment.
really had a chance and he wanted the ground
Heat of the
ball. And look,
moment.
it was a penalty, no doubt. And it was
Right.
non-releasable. And Syracuse's credit, their face-off guy was amazing. And he was amazing 3-on-3, let alone 3-on-2.
Right.
So,
So now
you
we
know,
make
then,
it.
Listen, you got a guy 220 playing defense. In all due respect to what you guys are saying, I still got to push back a little bit for the safety part. I'm looking at the safety. That's what I'm looking at. You got a guy 220 pounds.
He's fixated on this rule. We've
No,
done
I
5
gotcha.
episodes where he's brought up hits to the head. 5
Benny,
episodes,
220
he always
pounds,
brings up hits to
and
the
you're
head.
cross-checking the kid from Cornell at 146 pounds. So are you taking a stick and you're smashing him into the ground? That kid's going to survive?
It's illegal.
That kid's going to
That
survive?
should be, I mean, the way you described that play, I don't remember that play, but that should be 3 minutes non-releasable, 2 minutes
That's
non-releasable.
illegal.
But
They have
the guy,
rules.
if I'm 220 and a guy's on the crease and he takes a feed, I don't care if he's 146 or 246. I should be able to put him on his butt, and you're not. So
But my point
yeah.
to you is I understand the game where you guys are coming from. We don't respect the concussions. We don't respect the head injuries. People walk away from the game and they're hurting after they're done. I mean, where do you want to go with it?
Well,
So
I'm not going to
say I
condone.
want the old school.
Look, I totally understand you have to call the game closer. You don't want to take it back to be cavemen. And concussions, we certainly need to increase our awareness. But at the same point, you don't need to turn it into hacky sack on the quad. I bet you if we watch college hockey, they allow contact. They allow checks on the boards. And for some reason, the physicality in college lacrosse is being eliminated. And I understand it's a great debate in the game. I get it. I go on Twitter as much as the next guy. But, as someone who played defense and, sort of enjoyed that element of the game, and I still think that needs to be part of the game.
Yeah, I'm just bringing out that point because I think we don't have enough protocol. That's my point to Vinny and everything. You guys are right. Old school, new school stuff. We need a better protocol. And the helmets. Did you hear about the kid that got passed away? I don't know if you're aware of that. Where did he get hit? Do you guys know where he got hit in the helmet?
I thought he got hit in the back of the neck.
Yeah, where the helmet doesn't come. Why is the helmet cut off there?
Yeah, that's not my expertise. I don't make helmets. It's a shame. It's a tragedy.
Now they're talking about
One thing,
a little flap there.
the one,
That's the most vulnerable part of your life, right here.
the one thing that we learned with all of these unfortunate incidents, and that's about as unfortunate as you could imagine. Obviously, there's been the other incidents that have led to equipment changes where guys have been hit in the chest.
Yes.
The goaltender from Northport, the kid, Louis Acapora, right?
Yeah.
And the long stick defenseman that had gone to UMass. There's been a few, and the steelhead, Cornell,
Yeah.
Viardi,
Sure.
George.
Yep, George.
George Viardi.
They don't wear the right equipment.
Now
Right.
they made a rule where they had made these chest plates on these things, so that maybe there will be some design in the helmet, but let's face it, even with all of these things, lacrosse can be an inherently dangerous game. Any game can be an inherently dangerous game that has contact. So things can happen. The idea is that you have to try to do everything you can to minimize it. It's heartbreaking for these families that have gone through this. Some of those families have led to those changes.
Yeah. No, listen. Look,
putting the APs on the sideline and various things. These tragedies can save lives ultimately if people learn from them.
We could be leaders. We could be the leaders of it. People that talk about it. I don't want to sit here and talk about something like this. I understand the point of hitting and everything. But go ahead, Benny.
You go back to the 70s, right? When I played in college. You didn't have to wear shoulder pads. You didn't have to wear any pads.
That's insane.
You could play with gloves, a helmet, and a stick. And the guys did, So
It's insane.
ultimately, injuries, whatever reason, then it became you have to wear shoulder pads. You didn't have to wear a mouthpiece. Then they put a rule you had to wear a mouthpiece. So look, these things morph, and with time, as things happen, they will make changes. Equipment advances, rule advances, all these things. But once you start micromanaging every part of that side of the game almost becomes like, It's look, you want to talk about a hit? We're talking about penalties, and not Cornell. Theoretically, they lost one game. They lost to Penn State, a game that was crazy how they lost that game. They were in control of the game. There was a face-off. The big guy, Cascadin, the ball came out. He's going for the ball. Another kid's coming for the ball. Cascadin's tall and big. The other kid's small. The kid leans down. Cascadin is going for the ball, but he engages the guy and his head hits the kid. Whatever they gave him on that one, a 2-minute non-releasable, whatever it was. Penn State comes back to win that game. Without that penalty, they're not winning that game. Most likely, the odds were very slim of them winning that game. But it happens. So, that's why I say, as much as you try to teach guys how to be smart and how you play the game, you also have to be under control in how you play the game. Like what happened with this kid at Harvard. I'm sure he's upset with himself that he made the play that way, especially, like I said.
But he had time to look at the play.
Definitely,
so when you go back,
he did not have to put a hit on the guy.
Yeah, he didn't have to put the hit. It wasn't in motion.
If you're going to hit a guy who's near a sideline to knock him out of bounds, so you get possession,
it's different. Correct.
You go to hit a guy. If you're just with the one guy and you could hit him so you could get the ball, but in this scenario, the ball was on the ground. The Syracuse player was like over the ball. 2 other Harvard guys were right there. I have photos of it. It was not necessary at all to do that. But unfortunately,
all right, we got our point, right, Stevie? We got our points in here. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I guarantee for the next 3 episodes, this will come up again. Don't worry. Because he is fixated on this thing.
I'm fixing on. I happen to know some kids that got really injured, man. Excuse me. If you listen to the parents, well, go ahead.
Let's move on to our guest, maybe the more highlighted game of the week. Let's get some thoughts. This week was a major win for Notre Dame, a win where I said all year I felt like the fact that they lost a few games, it was like they were hiding in plain sight. We all knew what a tremendous team they are, but yet nobody was talking about them. And they just seemed there were a few things to me that stood out in this game against Ohio State. One, I think the goalie played better than he probably had played all year. I mean, I think he played well during the year, but this game, he really seemed to be a little bit more locked in. And I think we also saw the return of the Kavanaugh ride. He was causing mayhem again. And they just seem to have put when a Kavanaugh goes out and rides and creates the easy opportunities and they get goals of that nature, I think it's really demoralizing for another team. I think they start to see them get something easy and they're like, oh my God. And then they pile up and then the offense starts getting a little confidence and then you start seeing them roll. And I don't think we saw a lot of that maybe all year. It's like they decided to peak maybe at the right time.
It's playoff intensity.
I think the matchup had a lot to do with that. I think Chris Kavanaugh realizing that his next game could be his last had a lot to do with it. But you're 1,000% right. I watch every game. They have not played with that attitude all year long. They played angry. They played with a chip on their shoulder, and the Kavanaugh set the tone. I know it's just Chris now, but everyone feeds off that. When you get that goal, when he deflects that pass, picks it up, and feeds Devin McClain wide open, demoralizing is the word and uplifting is the other word. And when he's playing like that, we saw it when it was just Pat. We saw it when it was Pat and Chris, and then against Ohio State, it was everyone else starts acting like they're piranhas on the ride. And we haven't really seen that this year. Before the first matchup, Gary Gate mentioned that they didn't look to be playing with the same sense of urgency on the ride. So that set the tone. Certainly, Ricciardelli played well. He's been playing well since the beginning of the year. But I also got to give credit to Vinny's man, Will Lynch. I mean, he was dominant.
Yeah.
And, we were talking about Syracuse. You look at the stats. It's amazing. Everyone asks me, what do you think of the game? And I hate to say it. Well, it's going to come down to the face-off, but it's going to come down to the face-off. That's why Syracuse owns Notre Dame, because they've been waxed in the face-off game in both those matchups.
Good point.
Will Lynch was dominant. It's great to see. I'm a big fan of Will's, and that just sets the tone. And obviously, and the offense just looked a lot crisper. Jake Taylor had opportunities to do his thing that you haven't seen in a while. So I think the face-off game and the ride, which are kind of two of the same things, they played with an attitude, and I, hope they can
But you're
show up with
picking
that
Notre
same
Dame
attitude.
over Penn State this week, I would assume,
Yes.
at the game.
Yes.
And
I
then
mean,
what
I've
was
seen
the-
Penn State play a couple of times on TV, and they're talented, but, again, I haven't seen them win too many games because of tough matchups, but, Colgate had them on the ropes, and I love Matt Carwick at Colgate. Shout out Notre Dame grad. But, Colgate had them on the ropes, so, it's not going to be easy, but I think Notre Dame's going to Foxborough.
Wow, so you got Notre Dame in the Final Four again. That's some.
Last summer we had the assistant coaches Wellner and Wojcik on, and we had a great discussion with them. And right away we were hitting them with the pressure of a three-peat. It's only been done a few times, and it's like I said, they sort of like were hiding under the radar, but now it's like square and focus. You're 3 games away from that kind of history if you can win 3 tough games.
Well, the reason why it's tough for a three-peat, obviously, is the roster is always changing. And even though they came back with like 9 All-Americans, preseason All-Americans, which we could go on a tangent on how valuable preseason All-Americans are, they still lost some incredible pieces in Pat, which is everyone focusing on, and Eric Dobson. Like the extra man has not been the same this year. And I point to Eric Dobson because he could bring a hammer up top, which all extra mans need, because obviously you guys know better than I do that if they have to stretch out, then Jake Taylor and Richard Delly are wide open in the middle. But also, outside of Sean Light, the 2 defensemen were brand new. Marco Napolitano last year, and I'm drawing Chris Conlon. They were men. They were like 5th, 8th year, 9th year seniors who had played 1,000 games, and all of a sudden they were being replaced by guys who may be high school Americans but have never played before.
Right.
And look, they're outside of the Syracuse games where Syracuse won pretty comfortably. The other 2 losses are 1-goal losses to top 4 seeds. Maryland and Atlanta.
What do you got, kid? What's on your mind, man?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that going back to the ride, it's not even always in the ride, and I think the Kavanaughs deserve a lot of the credit. They did set the tempo. Going back to Matt, that's their nature. That's the way
Absolutely.
they across, and that definitely sets the tone on the field. But I got to say, I think the tone gets set by Corrigan. I think Corrigan, he don't give an inch with anything. And I think at some point he gets after these guys. He don't care who it is, his best player to his worst player. If a guy doesn't do something the way he wants it, he lets them know about it. He yells at guys. Look, some guys can't take to that kind of style, getting yelled at and stuff. But I think he does it from a good place. I think he does it from love. I think he does it because he knows how much they all really want to win, and this is the way to get the best out of them. But you talk about, not only on the ride, it's just like I saw them make some really bad plays the other day where they like just force the ball into a guy. The guy gets checked. The ball goes on they get it back, and then they try another play. Guy drops the ball. They get it back. So when you're getting those second and third chances, just because you're able to pick the ball up when it gets on the ground, if you probably charted, that'd be interesting to see how many times they've gotten second and third chances and turned them into goals. That's the kind of lacrosse they're playing now and what they've been known for the last couple of years. So if they could bottle that up again and do it through this playoff run, they're going to be formidable to
Certainly on display. They got a lot of extra chances. And, especially if you pick up a ground ball on the shot now, I know it's one thing of a turnover, but if you can reset that shot clock, that's a dagger to defenses who out there keep playing.
Let me ask Eamon the other question. It's a very interesting, quick one, Vinny. There's some upsets already happened. So what I want to ask you, like nobody's really talking about Richmond. I get the whole program, Richmond against Cornell. If you had to pick an upset now, I'll ask you one. Who you think is going to upset in these 4 games? What would you think could be the possible upset? Because we're going to have one.
I mean,
we're going to have one upset.
It's a stretch, but I think. Well, I mean, first of all, Notre Dame's probably favored, even though they're the unseeded team. I haven't checked the line, so I mean, that's the 5 seed against an unseeded team, and Syracuse is a 6 and a 3. I don't see Georgetown beating Maryland. I'd love Kevin Warren against Tillman. I love the matchup. Maryland is just really good, but boy, Georgetown looked really good against Duke. But Is Notre Dame Penn State an upset? Probably not. But I think Cornell is safe against Richmond. I know they played an unbelievable game earlier in the year. I think that's going to be tough to do twice. But I'll go Syracuse over Princeton. Is that an upset? I don't think Georgetown. I think the only real true upset would be Georgetown or Richmond, and I don't think either one of those is happening. So Syracuse over Princeton.
That is an upset, though.
Okay, then let's go Cuse in the Final Four.
Would you agree? I think them was number 1 at one time. I think now they came in. They're number 2. I think like that. Whatever. That is an upset.
Cuse has been tough to predict all year, but I think those guys returning to the island.
It's a 2-goal favorite. It's 1.5 that game, right?
Yeah, I agree with Eamon. I don't think Syracuse is as much of an upset, because they still are Syracuse. I think Richmond or Georgetown winning would definitely be.
Those are your 2 upsets.
Those would be, somebody would look at that and say, wow, those teams are in the Final Four. Certainly Richmond, who never even won a playoff.
Cornell only had 5 goals in the first half last game. I'm pretty sure. Am I right about that?
All I remember was it was a 1-goal game. But those Ivy League early season games are tough to predict because they start so late. I think Cornell's hitting a stride right now. I mean, it's going to be a good game because Richmond's great defensively, but I think Cornell's got too much for them.
Yeah, it's whether or not Richmond can score. I'm not sold completely on the Cornell defense compared to some of the other teams that are remaining, but they can score with any. I mean, the team that they really moved that ball and they got shooters all over the field, facilitators. They got good fade. They're deep with face-off guys. Their goalie has played better down the stretch, but can they stop anybody? That's Albany hung around for a little while with them, but at some point they weigh you down. I mean,
wasn't it 5-3 at the end of the first half? Help me out, guys.
What's that? What are you saying?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it was 5-3 at the end of the half. They only had 5 goals, Cornell. Am I correct? So they played them to 5 goals in the first half. Cornell only had 5. You guys don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Richmond's really good defensively. They have a very good defense, and but again, that was back in February, and I just think to Vince's point, Cornell's hitting its stride offensively. They got a lot of weapons, and they move it around.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. You never know.
Fun,
yeah. So let's.
So, Eamon, what do you think in general? The state of lacrosse in terms of the Division I with all of the new programs, et cetera. Do you there's a lot of people that might feel that because of the rules and the NIL and the transfer portal that there's a ceiling for some of the other conference teams, and that maybe the big 3 conferences, the Ivy League and the Big Ten and the
dead? Did you guys go dead?
ECC
are the benefit. They're the beneficiaries constantly of these transfers, and they don't seem. The other teams don't have, a real chance to get there. Do you think there is a shelf life for those other conference teams?
You use the word ceiling. I think it's legitimate. I mean, you're going to have a hard time in the world of NIL competing with, sports that are committed to lacrosse financially. Right now, it comes from alumni. It comes from football money, lesser basketball money. But if ACC school Y is going to spend $750,000 on NIL money, I'm just throwing out a random number, St. Joe's, Hofstra, Drexel are going to have a hard time competing with that. I'm not really sure. I'm not smart enough to figure out how the expansion of scholarships is going to impact things. But, if you're offering a family financial aid and NIL money to play lacrosse at a great school, that's going to be tough to compete with. So these ACC and Big Ten, lesser extent Ivy League, are going to have NIL money if the alums want to commit to it because their athletic budgets, I'm not sure that's the right term with NIL because NIL changes daily. But to your point, they're going to have more resources and it's going to be tougher to compete with. And the harder thing is those guys used to compete with the late bloomer or the under the radar recruit, right? So let's go say Drexel has a kid that's lights out his first year. He was never recruited. He, maybe took a PG year. There was no rooms left at the big school. So he goes and has an incredible freshman year. All of a sudden, Big Ten school Y, ACC school Z start offering or knocking at his door. And all of a sudden he wants to go to a big time program. How does Drexel replace that kid? Now, I'm just throwing out obviously hypotheticals here, but that's we see that in basketball, and now we're going to see that. So I think there is a ceiling, and I think it's a shame because the sport was enjoying great growth. And we're talking about Richmond. When Joe Amplo was at Marquette, he had them in the playoffs going toe to toe with Carolina the year Carolina won the championship. We need that as a sport. As much as we need Penn State and Ohio State to be great, which we do, we need the Big Ten to play for championships and not just Maryland, because we need to bring those fan bases that maybe didn't grow up on lacrosse. We also need more schools, just to have better schedules and a more compelling regular season. But I think ceiling is the right word. It's going to be very tough for first of all, it's going to be tough to grow the game at the men's D1 level because I don't see anyone adding now because it's going to be so tough financially to have a football team and a basketball team. No one's going to have any nickels and dimes left to start a men's lacrosse team. To grow and get to that level to compete with schools that have money is very tough.
And then for players, from what I understand, some conferences and they're limiting rosters. They cut rosters back.
Right, that's coming up. Yeah.
So when you do
that could actually help the smaller school if you're going to enforce that. Because after COVID and with the fifth year and transfer, you guys go to games. I mean, you look at, I went to the quarterfinals last year at Hofstra and Georgetown played Notre Dame. I think they were lined up at Umberto's. The kids were, there were so many kids on the sidelines, so I think if you are going to force roster limitations, that could help other schools because they're, at the end of the day, kids want to play. Right. No doubt, money is great and financial aid is great, but I also want to play.
Yeah. I mean, these kids put so much time into the game now with, the club circuits and the whole bit and individual training and to get all the way to, what's kind of like the brass ring to go play in college at that next level. And then, be on a team and never get in a game compared to, all right, I'll take a team that's a little less, but I'm going to play, and, there's something to be said about that. But the thing is, some of the best universities in the world are the top lacrosse schools also.
You're absolutely right.
Don't the rich kids do the same thing what Eamon's kind of saying? If you're a rich kid, you can go to what I call the preschools. Help me out, Ben. The
prep school, not preschool.
And you can go to he's got a kid. So you can go to the school. You go to the school and you get you could be a holdback, and if your family has money, you could go to a school. So most of these people, we're losing players on Long Island because everybody's going to Chaminade, and all the good kids from the town are going to one area, and we have less and less schools that are good. We don't have Levittown. We don't have, I can name 20 schools that are not good anymore because all the rich parents took their kids, and here's what they're doing now. They're holding the kid back 2, 3, and 4 years. He's going to push back on that, but that's what they're doing.
But you know what? He's made a great segue, though. He's made a great segue because this is a topic to really kind of talk about CityLax. This is an initiative that, and thank you for that, Smalls. That was very good. It was clever of you how you got that in there. But CityLax is an organization that is committed to the growth of the sport, especially in the inner cities, obviously. And when we were sitting and we were at the event, and you did a tremendous job in with that event the other night that we attended, where a dear friend Rob Pinnell was inducted into the Hall of Fame of CityLax, and it's amazing because to me, I felt sitting there, I'm like, wow, this is the real lacrosse. These programs that are being established is really what lacrosse is really about. And you should be applauded for those efforts. But I do think that really needs to be out there because what Smalley's talking about in terms of the prep schools and all of that, it's like CityLax is the counterbalance to that. It's giving the underprivileged and the inner cities some leverage to at least try to level the scales, and I think it's great.
Well, listen, look, from my point of view,
about that.
People talk about, from my point of view, when people talk about how many guys are going to go either Division One, you're going to go to Division One. You're an elite player, especially if you're going to play, right? You're elite. And with how many kids are playing today, there's not a lot of room on those rosters, but that's okay. And guys say to me, guys that don't really understand, friends that I have, or they follow it a little bit, and they go, "What's kid putting in all this time in for? He's never going to be on a Division I roster." And I say, kids have a dream to do that maybe, but that's not what this is about. I said, at the very least, like when I see the CityLax thing and your mission at CityLax to put sticks in their hands, to me, the best part about that whole thing is what you talk about, how the kids, they're paying more attention in school, their grades are going up, all those things. It's giving them friendships. It's a social aspect for them. So what if they don't become top players or go anywhere to play at a college level or whatever? Even if they just did it through high school, it's a big plus as far as I'm concerned, because I think you're making good citizens out of them by using the game as something to, as the attraction. Because we all know as players, for whatever reason, I always say, like the Native Americans call it the medicine game, like people fall in love with this game. They really do. Once they get a stick in their hand and they do it and they start getting a skill and they start progressing, it's fun.
Vinny, that's a good point. The kid you brought up to the stage, Eamon, was a wonderful kid. I didn't recall his name because I forgot. What was his name?
His name is Muhammad Saladoga. He's a senior from Jamaica High School.
That was so kind to you, the way you introduced him. And I watched the people in the room. It was just, everybody thought of themselves as when they started, and you giving back to that moment. I just wanted to share that with you. It was an amazing moment for the room when I looked around. I saw guys when they started to raise money, guys were raising their hand because they were so excited. You see a kid like that.
Yeah.
It brings everybody back to when they were a kid. I really loved that moment for you.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. It was great to see you. It was a great celebration of lacrosse. And, that's really what it's all about. To your point, Vin, we're not going to get anyone Division I. They don't play to grab a stick for the most part until the 9th grade.
Right.
We're trying to get it more in middle schools, but that's not, the mission. The mission is, as you mentioned, they graduate from high school. They're staying out of trouble in the afternoon because they have to go to lacrosse practice, and they're doing something they love with their friends. And, right now, like a lot of people are wrapping up their season, the playoffs are coming to an end. So you're seeing these posts on Instagram, boys and girls, what it meant to be a part of this team. And that's to me what it means. That to me what it's all about. And then, you also, just this week, 2 kids from Eagle Academy in Brooklyn, a couple of their teammates were there at that gala, but, they announced on Instagram that they're going to SUNY Brockport to play lacrosse.
Nice.
That's amazing. And,
That's
quite
amazing.
frankly, that does not happen without CityLax. That's not me bragging. I didn't create it. I'm just, taking the baton from Matt Levine, but what he's created creates those opportunities. And we're just trying to remind people of the lacrosse community that it's out there and that we need your support. And, you guys mentioned saying that's what the real lacrosse thing is. My mission has always been to get true lacrosse people to join me one day at Randall's Island and see 5 games going on at once with high schools from every borough and every ethnicity. And Dan Arestia from USA Lacrosse Magazine did a great job at capturing that. But I'm hooked. I go to these games and I see kids from all 5 boroughs of every ethnicity playing and saying, okay, we're doing a great job. Then I go to a recruiting showcase in the summer at Brunswick, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a different world. Yeah. But, hey, we're doing what we can, and we're knocking on the door. And I'm really glad you guys enjoyed it. And thanks for all the kind words. I appreciate it.
There's definitely going to be, sooner or later, there'll be some outliers that are just athletic enough. And the chances are, if they're in your program at CityLax in the school, I remember going back, one of the first events I attended at CityLax, I don't remember the kid's name, but he was from Harlem, and he was the first kid that had been offered a prep school scholarship to go play, and that was like step one. Like, so he became the model, or became like somebody that the other kids could look up to and say, look, if he did it, I can do it, He gave a great speech that night, I remember, and his mom gave even a better one. His mom was so thrilled about what the lacrosse game gave to this kid, because it happens everywhere. And I'm not just talking about kids that might be underprivileged in terms of, money and coming from families with money. You could have kids that have all the money in the world and they don't know what to do with themselves, occupy their time, an idle mind. the devil's workshop, But that's what I'm saying. When kids get into the lacrosse and they go and that's why I try to even tell a lot of, I hear it when I go to these club events, when I hear the parent, oh, that kid's never going to make it in. It kills me hearing, how they're critical of like that. If the kid didn't make a Division I team, he was a failure or she was a failure, they're not getting it. They're just not getting it.
Us parents nowadays are a little delusional in the whole sports world. We all think our kids are going D1 or are going to make $1 million playing baseball. So we've become warped. The idea of just playing for your high school team isn't enough anymore.
Yeah, I mean, use it for what it's worth. Like I said, social aspect of it too, teamwork, and all those things. If you have the right kind of coaches, kind of mentors, there's so many positive things that could come out of it. Now, is there pain along the way because a kid don't make a team and it hurts? But that's part of life. So they better learn how to adapt and get better and put more time in, and that goes with it too. So I see it as all positives.
Eamon, are you announcing this weekend? You're still doing it, right? You're still.
SNY now in the city, so it'll be Quint, Paul Carcaterra, and Anish, I guess, and Chris Cotter. So I focus now on my gig with SNY, which is the Mets channel here in New York City.
So that's where you're going to be on Saturday, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So actually, Saturday I'm going to be at the PSAL, our lacrosse championships. We got 4 games on tap on Staten Island, so I'll be at those games.
Wow.
Yeah.
Who's in those games? Do you know?
The semifinals are still going on, but I think Long Island City's advanced and Columbus from the Bronx have advanced. I think Columbus is playing today.
Wow.
Sorry.
One of the things about that young man, and the way you described him, the other night, and it made me remember, Vinny had organized, this was a number of years back, and we got to talk about maybe regenerating it again. We would go in the wintertime into a place in Queens called the Alley Pond Tennis Center. They would put a turf down over 4 tennis courts, and it was bubbled, and it was a pretty decent sized little field. And we'd go at early, we'd be on a weekend. It would be maybe 6 o'clock in the morning to start, 6 to 8. We would take that slot. There were just for a workout. We would work out. Vinny would be reffing. I was actually playing, and there were college guys, and there were some CityLax guys. There were some Harlem Lax guys. Mac O'Keefe came down and played. My nephews, the Ferraro brothers, played. I mean, it was a catch-all of all different ages, going from 9th grade to pros.
Yeah.
And all trying, and if you saw some of the names, guys like AJ Pilot played in that game. Enterman came at one time and played.
Leo came.
Mike Leo. So there were all different types of guys that came through that game. But what struck me is some of those guys, especially from CityLax and Harlem, they were coming. I'm like, these guys had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to get here because they were taking public transportation and everything else.
Joe Fowler was driving them out, but some of them had to take a train to Joe Fowler. They had to meet Joe Fowler, but they had to take
Wow,
so it showed their kid. There was one kid I remember. He had a pretty good sticks because he was small. He was running around like crazy, And like Steven said, he was sometimes playing. I used to ref and coach at the same time. What they enjoyed about how we did it was I rarely stopped them. I didn't stop and try to coach things. I just kind of, as a kid picked up a ball, I'd yell to him, throw it. The guy's open. I'd be right next to him, and the guy, I don't see him. I see him. Why do I see? Then when we take a water break, I'd grab a kid. But I remember a kid came with Joe Fowler one day, and he was kind of undersized. He was a little small, but he was quick, and he had a deep pocket. It's like the kids who first learn, they start to use really deep pockets because they can hold the ball better, maybe. But I said to him, what is your nationality? The kid says, I'm Dominican. So I said, I'm going to make you the first Dominican All-American in lacrosse. And the kid started laughing, I said, wouldn't that be something? You were the first Dominican All-American in lacrosse. And the kid loved it, But they tried so hard. And, of course, they were a little, they weren't up to some of the kids we had there. But how we would do it is we'd break it up and we'd manage by putting kids together at a kind of a same skill level, one on this team, one on that team, one on this team, one on that team. But it was funny that one day, Tim Langton, who was a great college player, All-American, played in the pro leagues, he had a son that was playing at St. Anthony's at the time. He was a defenseman. I think he was in ninth grade, maybe the most he was in 10th grade. And I'm breaking up the teams, and I said to him, Langton, go down there. You cover that guy, you know. So he says, okay, because he starts to jog down. And I'm watching him as he's jogging, and he stops like halfway, turns back. He goes, that's Mac O'Keefe, because he saw the Penn State helmet, you know. He was still in school, Mac. That's Mac O'Keefe. I said, yeah, he's easy to call. I said, he's all left. I said, take his left away. You'll be fine, you know. And the kid's looking, and his father's on the side laughing and taking pictures now that his son is covering, you know, Mac O'Keefe. It was good moments. We had a lot of fun with that, you know. And what I said to them was, every time you come, if you just pick up one little thing that makes you a better player, your game is going to progress. And sometimes you're going to forget. I said, but the most important thing is try to remember what you taught and put it into action, because you can't backslide. You know, once you figured it out or somebody's coached you with something, if you go back to your bad habit, it's no good, you know. And that's really the difference between great, at least in my experience with guys I grew up with, played with and all, the guys who've been able to, you know, they don't have ego. They're willing to accept advice and even criticism from other guys. You got to have a thick skin, you know. And as long as those kids can have that attitude, and that's what I find about the guys like the city kids that will come. They didn't care. They were trying so hard. They knew that they were behind the curve in terms of their age compared to these kids that were coming from Massapequa or St. Anthony, Chaminade kids that I had coming down there. But to their credit, they just kept playing hard and tried to develop themselves. So it's good to see.
They, you know, as I mentioned, the young man we're talking about from Jamaica, he'll go anywhere and everywhere for a clinic, and he's not the only one, which is why I, you know, am desperate in recruiting recent college grads who are living in Manhattan now to help us out, because that hour you spend with our kids on the weekend at a clinic in Queens or Manhattan or Staten Island is invaluable. And to your point, they learn one thing that they practice on all week. And you know, the college kid is 22, the high school kid is 15 or 16. 17, that's going to resonate a lot more than me telling them how to catch and throw. It just is. It's life, you know. And they just played, so they have a better way of teaching it than I do or our coaches do. But so that's amazing for us. And then, you know, to your point, I tell all the city kids at our clinics, get on the wall. Trust me, I know one thing about New York City. There's a handball court near your school somewhere that you can get on that wall, and you'd be amazed how much better your stick skills get if you do that 2 or 3 times a week. And they do it.
Maybe we have to regenerate that game in the city, Vin. Maybe we have to regenerate that at some field at Randall's Island.
Yeah.
We'll get that
Alley Pond was a great spot because it was kindly centrally kind of.
Yeah, no, we know it. We've done stuff at Alley Pond. I know where it is. Good stuff. Good place. It
was great because they came from the city. Guys came from Connecticut. Guys came from the island. It was a great spot, and unfortunately, when COVID hit, that ended it for that 2-year period. And then I don't think Alley Pond put the turf down anymore. It wasn't cheap, you know. We were very lucky. We had a very generous sponsor, our friend Chris Hine. He sponsored it basically, you know.
Wow. It was the most expensive place ever.
Yeah, no, it was like, you know, I think
Welcome to life in New York City.
Yeah, we used to
an hour.
I think we paid for 12 sessions from 6:30 to 8. We had it an hour and a half, and it was like $7,500 to $8,000. You know,
was it in the bubble, the tennis courts, or was it outside?
No, okay, yeah. This was in the winter when they weren't really playing for anybody else. You know, so that's why they were all able to come. But it was funny. Nice. So Chris sponsored it. Stephen and I would coach. Sometimes he played, sometimes he coached. You know, but I kind of ran the field part of it and was going back and forth, reffing and all. But it was funny when the thing was over. Parents, you know, like spread the Long Island parents, they'd come out and they'd be holding checks, and some guys would have money in their hand, and they'd say, you know, what do we owe you? And I said, nothing. You know, and they said, nothing. Are you kidding? Yeah. You know, when that
doesn't happen in lacrosse very often.
They said, so I thought it was funny. I said, well, thank over there, Chris Hines standing over there. He sponsored it, so thank him for the time. I just come because I like doing it, but he's the guy paid for it, so. It worked out. We had a lot of fun with it. And I know the kids, you know, some of the parents had said to me, you know, my kids My son said, this is the best thing he comes to. He loves coming here, the way you do it, because we just let them play.
Right. That's
I know
awesome.
as a player, I hated when I went to, even in practice, in college, no less, every 5 minutes stopping where they started instructing and this and that. I'm like, come on, let's just play. You only get better playing. In my opinion, you got to play to get better. You need experience playing on a field. All the drills, all the shooting, all the talking. Yes, you need fundamentals, obviously, but there's nothing replaces game experience.
Good call.
Yep.
So, Eamon, your final four. What is it going to be, kid? Give it to me in a nutshell.
All right. Cornell
Come on.
wins. Syracuse wins. Notre Dame wins. Maryland wins. I think that's pretty much.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, I can eat a lollipop with that four-pick. No, but the thing is, there's got to be one upset in there. And Vinny,
Well, I got two. I got a 6 beating a 3 and an unseeded beating a 5.
You got the Cuse as an upset. I agree with you on that. Cornell wouldn't be an upset like that. I mean,
Yeah, Cornell would
Well,
be a
Notre
big,
Dame
big
is
upset.
counting Notre Dame as an upset because they're unseeded.
Well,
because they're lower
yeah,
seed,
that's
yeah.
true. But I don't know. I don't know how
I
Notre
kind
Dame-
of did feel, when you think about it, I kind of did feel bad for Ohio State that they won the Big Ten. They were steamrolling,
Yeah.
and their prize is to play Notre Dame.
It's such a shame that we accept this tournament the way it is. And look, I don't have to hit anyone's budget, but they're the 4 seed. And look, every other game was tight too, so they weren't going to get an easy game. But still, they're the 4 seed. They get Notre Dame. Penn State, who's in the same conference as the 5, gets Colgate. How do you justify that? And in lacrosse, we just accept it. We just say, well, travel this, no rematches. Ohio State got a tougher game than the 5 seed, the 6 seed, the 7 seed, and the 8
that's
seed.
what I'm saying. If you think about
that, at what point do we just move forward to a 1 through 16 true matchup and accept the bill? Yeah. You guys don't want me to go on my tangent about fixing college lacrosse, but can we?
We want to know. We want to know.
So why doesn't put you on the head? You're the guy.
Some people.
I want, as a fan, this is purely as a fan, someone involved in college lacrosse, whether it's the NCAA or a conference commissioner, to say we need to elevate this sport because it has the potential. Why are we in a rush to wrap this thing up on Memorial Day so that the Holy Crosses of the world and Dartmouths of the world never play in a game when it's nice weather? Why are we playing a whole month in February when no one is watching the sport because we're all watching basketball? No one wants to go to a game because we're going to freeze our tuchuses off. And then we're going to rush to get, if you invested in the sport, that might not be the right term, and pushed it back 2 weeks and had a couple of amazing weekends where Hofstra's playing on Hempstead Turnpike on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, say at 4 o'clock, so all the youth and high school kids, and you get 5,000 or 6,000 instead of maybe 500 or 50. I'm just using Hofstra as an example. You could do the same thing across the country. Build that sport up and make the NCAA tournament amazing so that we don't have to worry about flights. And then maybe we can get to the point where it's 1 through 16.
Yeah.
But, we just accept it.
They should expand the tournament. I mean, the fact that Army got left out of the tournament is sad. A team loses 2 games the whole year. You could say, they just didn't get it done, and RPI and all that. I heard the arguments from Cork and Quint on the show that night, and they're not wrong. I'm not disagreeing with them. I just think that, 16, you could put some of these out of bracket games, expand it a little bit more.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's tough with the RPI because you're relying so much on the rest of your schedule and even more importantly, the rest of your conference. You guys know the drill. You don't need to hear from me, but the ACC and the Big Ten, to a lesser extent the Ivies, they feed off everybody. So Harvard goes and knocks off Syracuse. That benefits the whole rest of the Ivy League. When you're in the Patriot League, not only are you not getting that, but the bottom teams in your league, their schedule, they're not playing Virginia or Notre Dame or Harvard to build up their RPI. Yeah. So you really have to be perfect. Army going in isn't allowed to slip up. It's unfortunate, but, you lose 2 games to BU and Colgate. Even though you beat Carolina, Carolina's RPI is already so much higher because Notre Dame beat someone or Syracuse beat someone.
Right.
Everyone benefits off
that. Who picks it, Eamon? Who picks? Who is the actual? I don't say you know the person, but
everyone knows it. The selection committee. I don't know who's on it this year, but everyone.
Hold on a second. Who is on the selection? Is it somebody?
You want to name names? He wants.
You got ADs, you got coaches. I haven't paid attention to the selection committee since 2022 when they screwed Notre Dame.
Yeah,
but You
Well,
know,
Vinny, is it a guy sitting behind? Is it a
it's like
guy in the
4 or 5
local?
people. It's just like the college football playoff. It's just like basketball. It's a committee. They sit there, they look at all the data, they watch games. You know, in lacrosse, we're told the eye test doesn't matter, so we'll believe that. But, you know, the selection committee, the way they do it for the most part, really is almost unnecessary because it usually just comes down to RPI. But, you know, look, Army was in a tough spot. You know, did they really deserve to go over Harvard? Harvard had a Syracuse win, and, you know, they played a tougher schedule.
Yeah.
And the other problem is when you schedule, you really have to know what you're doing because Army's out of conference schedule wasn't awful, but those teams that they played, I don't remember it completely, but I know they played UMass and Yale and Rutgers. So that's 3 teams that are pretty good that had down years. All 3 had down years.
Yeah.
You're in a tough spot.
Well, that, you know, I think the way somehow they could do it, eliminate the conference tournaments and expand the overall tournament. Those conference tournaments, why are you going to play a team 3 times? You know, you play them, you know.
Okay, so here's the argument. I'm just playing devil's advocate because I'm with you. I'd get rid of the conference tournament just so we could have more intra-conference games, to have Harvard play Notre Dame or Duke play Princeton. But if you don't have a conference tournament and you fall behind 0-2, your season's over. You don't have that chance to get the automatic bid. That's the argument. At least if you can keep playing because you have that automatic bid.
Yeah.
Stephen, which one do you like, Stephen?
I have a different pet peeve. And this, in Eamon's expertise, he might be able to explain this to me because it all is about the scheduling. I'm watching the games this weekend. This first weekend is like basically like the Thursday, Friday of the NCAA tournament. And you got games starting 12, 2, 4, 8. You know, these games are going all day, both Saturday and Sunday. Why during the season do they have to put 27 games at 12 o'clock? Why can't?
Well, here's why. That's the problem. That's the problem with lacrosse in February because TV's not involved. If you notice, and again, I'm a TV guy, so I don't expect anyone to notice. As the season gets later and more windows open up, you'll get a 5 o'clock game. You'll get a Friday night game. You'll get a game on ESPNU and the ACC network. When you're playing in February, there's no TV spots open because the worst women's college basketball game you can think of is going to outrate the best lacrosse game you can think of. That's just life. Right. So then, since you're not on TV, the schedule's all up to the school. And the school doesn't think like that. The school doesn't think that if I play at 3 o'clock, I'm going to get everyone's eyeballs on ESPN+. They just want to play at their schedule.
Right.
So you get a whole month of everyone playing at the exact same time. But and I'm with you.
They might get more advertising if they did.
They might. Look, they got to figure that out on their own.
Stephen, they know.
They have to. So no, but to your point, I don't think they're even thinking about, well, this could benefit us if we play. Now, again, the team they're playing wants to get out of Dodge as quickly as possible and get back to campus. That's why every game's at noon. They want to get it over with. But if you were to sit there and lay out the benefits, if you play at 2 o'clock, you'll have everyone looking for lacrosse watch your game on some streaming service.
Yeah,
true.
Well, you're going to have to convince them it's worth it.
All of this stuff is
lacrosse is down at the totem pole. We're not respected in the universe. I mean, the schools.
Hold on a second. This is a little bit on the lacrosse fans' job too, because if we got better ratings, they'd put more into it. That was my biggest argument when I was doing games at ESPN2, the chicken or the egg. Because they would sit there, I'd watch a softball game and see all their production value and what they have. And I'm like, how come we don't have that? And everyone would say, well, softball gets better ratings than you. Well, of course it does. First of all, there's a softball team on every high school in America, right? Everyone sitting down, cracking open a beer on a Saturday afternoon looking for sports knows what softball is. Who knows what lacrosse is? But my argument was, what are you doing to improve the lacrosse ratings? But at the same point, lacrosse people don't watch as much as they should. It's just the ratings aren't there. If the ratings were there, a network would get behind it. So what comes first? Because ESPN tried, 2010, they tried a primetime Final Four. That incredible Virginia-Duke game where the Brattons go behind their back or whatever it was. I think that's 2010. Maybe it's 2011. They tried a nighttime Final Four. The ratings weren't there. So we as a sport have to watch more. We have to go to more games. But then my flip side is the colleges have to market it more. The Ivy League brought its tournament to Manhattan once, at Columbia a couple times. They didn't do anything to promote it. The ACC, they took it to Charlotte. They didn't do anything to promote it. So you have to do both. But it's on us to watch more.
I think with lacrosse, the viewership because of so much the club stuff. I'm not knocking the club stuff, but kids are playing a lot. At the time they would be watching, they're playing.
1,000%.
it's like the same issue that the Pro League had from when we played with the Lizards to the PLL. Their issue is if you're a parent and your kid is playing in or whatever, and you had 4 games that day, and then yet the tickets affordable and all, you got a night game at Hofstra. The parents are like, I just sat on the field for 7.5 hours, and now I'm going to go to a game tonight to watch another game. I'm going home. We got to go back to the field tomorrow again. So you're competing with really what's going
1,000%.
on because that's our only market is really the kids that are playing and the people that play the game. You're trying to.
That's why if the sports, right. But that's why if the sport's ever going to get to another level, you have to create fans that aren't the youth league parents. That's
Right.
why the Ohio States and the Penn States are so important, because you have to get people to watch who just want to watch that uniform, right? The youth kid who just wants to watch Matt Kavanaugh or Chris Kavanaugh or CJ Kirst is a finite audience. You need to get someone to watch because it's Notre Dame, Ohio State.
Right. Yeah. Well, listen, this is always, look, there's no lack of effort, at least. At least people are still intent on trying to do it. We do our best and whatever it is. If we're always going to be just like a niche sport, it's going to be a niche sport. And, people who don't.
Well, let's at least try, Vince, pushing this. Vinny, can we push the season back 2 weeks and put the Final Four off Memorial Day and put it in Annapolis? If you took the Final Four attendance and took it out of an NFL stadium and put it in Annapolis, it would look like a rock concert on TV. Can we at least try that?
Well, what do you mean by Annapolis? What field? What are you
Annapolis, where Navy plays. Navy's home stadium only holds about 40 or 45, so it would look packed. When you get decent crowds at the Final Four, it just looks empty.
Yeah.
And look, don't get me wrong. I like going to Philly. It's easy. Foxborough, I could do
without.
without.
Put the girls in this year? Because last year I went, and that was my complaint to Vinny and Steven. We don't have fans anymore going to the game. I says,
well, it's a holiday weekend. It could be tough for some people. When the game's over, they're playing it on Monday. The traffic could take, if it's down south, you're coming from Long Island, take you 7 hours, 8 hours to get home.
All the fans we had, I don't know.
I always felt, when I was in school, I understand why they did the weekend, the Memorial Day weekend games, that had value. But I always felt from an athlete standpoint, when I was in school, you had the semifinals one weekend and the final a week from then.
Really?
Yeah, it was a week. Yeah, no, it was a week in between. So it gave teams, because really when you think about this, you're playing for a championship when you're really not at you might not be at your best. You could have had a game on Saturday, and then you're playing Monday. What happens if a guy gets a Charlie horse, gets hit with a knee? Guys got to play like the Kavanaughs. They sucked it up. They did it, they were taped together to play in the championship. It worked out for them. They won, but they weren't 100% that day.
Oh, that's been an argument. Definitely some people say push it back a week.
No, but back in the day, that's how it was. It used to be a week in between from the semis to the championship.
It's hard to convince.
There was a buildup. There was a buildup of the whole week for it,
Let's face it. It's hard to convince people when they get accustomed to doing something a certain way. Now the Memorial Day has been the main picture. But there was a time where it wasn't. Like Vinny said, the only way you're going to ever get that changed is if you can convince the powers to be that there's more money to be made doing it the different way. If you can convince them of the season change in that and lay it out in a logical way, maybe they would look at that.
That's a good point. That's why they're bringing Jenny Levy this year.
You would have to make a
That's why they're bringing her.
Because people are adverse to change and they don't like to think that they're breaking something that's working. And if you can show it, I agree. I do agree. I think the Memorial Day thing, they're just stuck in Memorial Day. If they could get over that, the fact of the holiday, and just move it to June, move it the week after or whatever, and extend that out, and maybe even pull in from February, like you're saying, it might be better for lacrosse. And
that's why they got the women's coming, Steven.
Yeah, they combined the women into
the women is coming this year, Division One.
Place. Yeah.
They're gonna, North Carolina's going to bring so many fans. Jenny Levy, hopefully they make the Final Four.
Maybe that'll help it, but
big time.
Yeah,
that's been the men are sinking.
But if you look, you can look on Wikipedia and you can see the attendance of national. I remember the game I was at when Rob Pennell was a freshman. It was at Gillette.
Better
and
than Gillette.
Cornell Syracuse. I think there was over 40,000 that day. That
Yeah,
place-
Foxborough draws well because they take from all of New England. It's not great for us living in Long Island and New York, but they do very well with their region. So they get a great crowd. They've done and Kraft gets behind it.
Yeah, for the Final Four, how they do if they can ever get back up to those numbers. Hopefully they will get 30.
This year they're going to climb definitely more than last year. That's a fact.
Okay.
One of the other ways that Eamon, grows the game, and I don't know if Smalley knew this, but this is his wheelhouse. Eamon gives great nicknames. He's a nickname. Now, I don't know if you know, Smalley is a king of all nicknames. He's another
Yeah,
nickname.
yeah, Smalley's a nickname.
Okay.
You guys are gonna have to get together on some nicknames for guys.
All right.
What
Eamon,
what were your more memorable nicknames that you've coined to?
Let's see. There was Matty Ice for Matt Kavanaugh and the Motor City Hitman for Sergio Perkovic are probably the two that come to mind.
Those are great.
but he also had a catchphrase.
Yeah. Time room bullseye on a shot, right down Hempstead Turnpike on a fast break.
Right down
So,
Broadway.
I had fun.
Right down
That's
Broadway.
right down Broadway.
Smalls, what are some of your best nicknames?
No, you don't want to know over the air here. No, you don't want to. I'll keep it. I got a lot of nicknames.
What do you think, Vin? What's your favorite nickname that Smalley gives out?
I don't know.
Tell the person.
He's got a bunch of them. He's got a bunch.
No, we got the box though. Eamon, all due respect. Every year I get a suite, right? And I have to convince Hofstra to give me the big suite. I got clients, I do my own thing or whatever, and I let Vinny handle it. So I invite everybody because they're always asking me, and then Vinny's got to narrow it down. Vinny got a list. He goes, 3-time All-American. Your net worth is $20 million. Not good enough. Next guy.
I need to know that guy for CityLax. If he's not good enough for the suite, he'd be good enough for me.
Right?
Yeah, so they handpick everybody. So then we just recently got a late call. I can mention the name. It's on the air. They listened. We love them anyway. You know the Gate brothers?
I've heard of
Last
him,
year
yes.
I had one of the Gates up there. Paul Gate came up for one of the games, and we had an absolute ball up there. He came up there. We had a great show. And, of course, the whole world wanted to be up. So this year we might be able to – might want to come up. He's thinking about coming, and we could get him up there. We got a spot for him up there. Now I told one person. I said, don't tell anybody. They told 20. I think last year I had 146 emails. I'm up to about 170 emails with text, and each guy asked for 4 to 6 tickets. So right now, I got to ask for 475 tickets total. You can't make it up.
When we get off, Smalls, when we get off, I'm going to email you the CityLax brochure to leave around the suite on Saturday, all right? Just,
let me ask you a
subtly
question.
leave it out next to the chicken parm and the beverages. There we go. Vin's got it.
Listen, I took it.
Hey, Eamon.
QR code on the back.
I had to read up on things. There's a barcode right there.
That's it. You hold that QR code up.
There you go.
Eamon, I'm going to promise you one thing, and I don't know how to articulate this. I'll do the best I can. I'm always moved by what people do. You're a great announcer. You're all great at what you do. But what you're giving back is what I'm really impressed with. That was my father. My father was a Chaminade guy, and I lost him 5 years ago. So I call myself Mr. Chaminade. It's a joke, but people call me. They'll get their kids in. Can you call Vinny? And I try to help. And I'm all about giving back. And I was thinking while I was sitting there, and I want to be part of the fundraiser, not only give, I believe at that event, I can help people give money. There's going to be a way that I'm going to come up with where each person could give something without insulting them, whether it be 10, 20, 30,000. Vinny, do you think I'd be able to help? Be honest.
Yeah, he's a good auctioneer. He is. He's good. I've seen him in action.
To be honest, we're working in. We hosted an event last year at Plan Dome. We're going to try to do that again in the fall. So I will lean on you for help get people there.
Well, I heard that one.
Will you promise to come down with me and guide me? I think a little guy.
I'll come down.
I got to walk along with his brother calls him we call him the Long Island Goat. You know, I had to hear all these stories growing up. But anyway, no, I'm there. I'm definitely there to help. Definitely. I think
Thank you.
Raising the money, what you're doing is amazing. Anyway.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I only have one more thing. I was just curious if Eamon is there a memorable game or moment that sticks in your mind for your long career in terms of something especially.
Yeah. Well, I've been lucky enough. I haven't done this as long as Quint, and I kind of got out of it a little too early. But I've been fortunate to do some amazing games. But I'm a little biased. The greatest game, or I feel like the game that I called that was the greatest game was Notre Dame Albany at Hofstra in the quarterfinals in 13. You guys, Rob, talking about how packed your box is going to be.
Yeah.
That place was packed that day.
Yeah.
I know Hofstra always gets a good crowd, but that afternoon, excuse me, because of the Thompsons, because it was the late game. There was a New York City vibe in that arena, in that stadium that day, and the Thompsons were amazing. Notre Dame got out to a big lead. Maddie iced it for the Irish in overtime. Carolina Maryland championship game that went in overtime was amazing. Bryant knocking off Cuse in the Dome in the first round is one that comes to mind. But the game that I always look back and said, okay, that's the greatest game I called was Notre Dame Albany at Hofstra. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was
It was a
something.
game where it's interesting. You see the changing of games. That I believe was the game where Lyle Thompson, where he drove up the left side and he used his right. He did a backhander, and that became a staple. Somebody saw that and said, "Wow, that was pretty easy." Nobody was doing that.
Lyle was amazing.
And now you see
Lyle was amazing.
You see it all the time. It's almost
Amazing.
like an innovator in terms of the game, and that's how the game changes. And guys try.
No doubt.
And who's the winner of the Final Four? Eamon, who's the winner? Give me the guy that wins it all.
Start playing the fight song. I can't go against them. Come on, Notre Dame stuns Cornell in the semis. Why not?
I don't know. I got to tell you.
Give me your step back. Come on, man.
I will say this much. I came back. I resurrected from last place in our picks.
Yes.
To going up to all the way up. The only ones ahead of me now are the fans. But I'm not so good at picking. We're all lousy with the spread. We're all below 500, believe it or not, I think, right?
Well, that's why they have the spread. It makes it more difficult.
With the spread, it's really tough. These games, I couldn't figure out games this year. Teams were up one week, down the next week. I couldn't figure it out. But
before we give our shout out today, we always give a shout out, Eamon, to somebody. It could be 2 or 3 for you, somebody in our past that we want to say thank you, whatever. But before I give my shout out, I'm known as Mr. Sean Mutzlick. You probably Mr. What is your favorite ice cream? We asked Carcatera what his favorite ice cream. What's your favorite ice? What's your go-to ice cream at night?
I got to go with Rocky Road or cookie dough. I got to have that surprise cookie and the dough in there. That's what I like, yeah.
Oh, now do you prefer a certain brand like Haagen-Dazs or Breyers? What do you go with?
No, probably Baskin Robbins or Breyers. I'm not a big Haagen-Dazs guy.
Yeah. Oh, that's good, man. All right, so who's your shout out, Vinny?
That's a good one.
Steven, go ahead. You go first.
I'll go first. I got actually 2. First, I want to give a shout out to Matt Levine of CityLax because I think, he's one of these unheralded guys who does so much for the game. His contributions are immeasurable in terms of the life that he impacts in such a positive way. And I just don't think, we've always had various guys, we grew up in Port Washington. Harvey Cohen was such a great influence for us and gave so much to so many people a start in the game. And I think that's what Matt is doing. He's like a modern day Harvey Cohen. And, I think he deserves a lot of recognition. So my shout out goes out to Matt Levine. And then on a more somber note, obviously this young man who passed away, Dylan Veselik, our hearts are broken in the lacrosse community for him and his family. And I just would love to just say prayers that, the lacrosse community is a special place. You can always count on them. And, that family is in need. So I would hope that everybody says a prayer for them and for Dylan. It's a tragic event and hopefully we can learn from it and make maybe something safer and better. But our hearts go out to his family. And those are my shout outs.
What do you got, Vincenzo?
I'm going to give a shout out to the Chaminade Flyers contending for a championship tomorrow night, 5 p.m. Games being played at Hofstra. Anybody can make it there. You're going to see a great game. We haven't won one in a while. St. Anthony's has had Chaminade's number for the last few years. Maybe as many as 4 years in a row or something. I think they've won it. It's unusual, but it happened. And this is our shot. We broke their streak in terms of game-winning streak. Earlier in the year was a hard-fought game. Chaminade came away with a win. I expect nothing less tomorrow. Real hard-fought game that could probably go either way. But I like our chances, and I want to wish the Flyers the best of luck.
Yeah, I'll give out a shout out to the O'Connell family. One of the O'Connell families is one of the assistant coaches, Thomas O'Connell, at Chaminade High School. He's moving up the ladder there. He played 4 years at Maryland. He was also a captain, and he won the first national championship for coach there. And also his brother, Michael O'Connell, who went to Chaminade, was fortunate, went to Stanford for 3 years, graduated early, played basketball. Then he went to North Carolina State, and he went to the Final Four last year. And they invited me to the Final Four. So the family is so good to me. And also Matt Kavanaugh for retiring. I think he retired, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got some last week.
And he's been so good to his younger brothers and all that he's done for the sport and everything. And that's it. Up to you, Eamon.
All right, Eamon, what's your shout out?
Yeah, you guys kind of stole my idea, Stephen. Love hearing the Matt Levine shout out. He's amazing. U.S. Lacrosse is on this Elevate 28 initiative to elevate the increased participation. No one's done more than that than Matt. Look, I'm gonna play to my audience. My shout out to Jim Metzger, presenting sponsor for our gala, great supporter of CityLax, but also a good friend of mine. Had a chance to know him over the years. Always great talking lacrosse with him. So Jim Metzger, and as Vinny mentioned, big game, 5 o'clock, St. Anthony's, Chaminade. So my last shout out goes to both the coaches, Keith Weiserick and Jack Moran. Great help to me when I was calling their games, and their alums have been amazing to CityLax. So I won't be able to make it, but the Flyers and the Friars have been amazing to CityLax, and it all starts with those two great head coaches, not just on the field, but instilling a culture and producing leaders and great young men. So Vinny, enjoy the game. Go Flyers, I guess, but
nice, yeah. Thursday at 5 o'clock, right, Vin? It's 5 o'clock.
Thursday tomorrow, 5 o'clock. Yep. Thank you for your time, Eamon. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, we
thank you guys for having me on. This was awesome, and I hope everything goes well at Hofstra Thursday night and then Saturday. I'll try to sneak into the box.
There you go.
And then we got to sign off with, of course, what else could we sign off with for Eamon?
Repeat. Love it.